it?
Yes.
Yes, I would assume that's a yes.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. I'm very, very excited to do this panel. It is one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now. I am a Sunbow kid. I grew up watching the Generation 1 cartoon, and to get to spend time talking with one of the not only writers but producers of the show is going to be very, very exciting. So please put your hands together for Mr. Michael Charles Hill. Sitting down, I'm tired. How are we?
Great. I'm having a grand time.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How's the morning been for you so far?
Very busy.
Yeah. Okay, so Michael, I always start by asking people, before we start talking about Transformers and you getting into writing and things, what was your background? What was a young Michael Charles Hill interested in when he was growing up?
All right, so taking the Wayback Machine. As a young child, I really didn't have any idea. In hindsight, what I later recognized was I always loved movies. And typically I would spend the weekend on a Saturday watching war movies, westerns, film noirs with my father. And on Sunday, musicals and comedies with my mother. And I watched everything. Yeah. Now, granted, I'm a child of the 60s, and lived in a small town in Vermont, so limited channels that we could watch anything on. So whatever came on, I was watching. But it never occurred to me that it was a job that I could have. I didn't think that far ahead. And growing up in a small rural town, we didn't know anybody who even knew anyone who worked in the film business. So it wasn't until I was probably 19, and my girlfriend at the time and I would go see movies all the time, and afterwards go to a diner, have a cup of coffee, and we talk about the movie, and I would talk about specific scenes, and like, oh, that should have been a dolly shot, or the camera should have moved this way, or they should have cut the scene a little sooner. And after like a year of this, she said, maybe that's what you should be doing. And it just, again, hadn't occurred to me. So by that time, I decided to, well, maybe it took me a year or so, but I ended up moving to Hollywood and going to film school. And that sort of kicked everything off.
So that's quite interesting. That's just like, you're so familiar with the craft by watching it that you've picked up dolly shots, close-ups, editing techniques, things like that. And it's just sort of osmosis, it's burrowed into your head.
Yes.
And then, yeah. And so, was the intention to always write?
No, I thought I wanted to be a director. And when in film school, all the instructors said, if you want to direct, the best way in is to be a writer. So then I learned the craft of writing screenplays. And so for the first few years in Hollywood, and after I met Flint Dilley, because we were both at the same film school, that's all we were focused on, was writing a feature script that we could sell, that would open the door for us, and a nice payday as well, that could then open other doors and make the possibility of directing. Because I was really interested in the work of, more often than not, writer-directors than just directors. And maybe I'm jumping ahead of your question, but then I got into film production, primarily TV commercials. Started out working, as many people do, lowest person on the totem pole, a PA, production assistant. And you're basically a grunt and a warm body. And so you're the lowest paid personnel. Zero respect, but important to the production. First person on the set, open the doors, make sure craft service is available, and last person on the set, including cleaning up. And then your job is to take the exposed film to the film lab and the sound to the sound lab, and then go out and buy pastries and bagels and lox and cream cheese at some 24-hour grocery store, so you can have it ready for tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock when all the crew come up.
I was going to say, when one of the actors suddenly gets the munchies at 2 a.m., you're the man to call.
Oh, well, you can do it. There was only one time that I ever worked on a shoot that we were still on at 2 a.m. Typically, it was a 10-hour day, and that'd be it. I was working on a commercial for RCA television sets. In theory, it was a simple setup. You had these TV sets on risers, and as they rose, the camera was on a dolly, the camera pushes in, but then it also raises up. And for whatever reason, the director and the camera operator could not coordinate enough to get the right shots, and the advertising agency was going crazy. But the point of the story is, across the, from our studio, or soundstage, Steve Martin was making Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And their crew arrived the same time we did. And we watched their crew go home. And we watched their crew come back the next day. And we watched their crew go home again. So anyway, I sort of worked my way up the ladder from production assistant, production manager, to assistant director, to producer, and then sometimes I was copywriter on commercials. And then I stumbled into animation writing.
Yeah. So you mentioned there that you sort of put the connection between writer-director, and so used writing as a way to get into potentially directing. So were you a fan of writing growing up? Did you write short stories, things like that? Was it?
Not at all.
No.
I never knew that I had it in me.
Okay.
And I wasn't even a big reader then.
Yeah.
I probably wasn't until I turned 21. All of a sudden, I became a voracious reader. Yeah. And I have a huge collection of modern first edition hardcovers that I cherish. Not only would I never get rid of them, I have a difficult time letting anyone borrow them so that they can read. Because they never come back in the same condition as they go out.
Well, I feel I must ask then, favorite novel of all time? It's the easy questions are the ones that I like to do.
I don't know about all time, but one that just knocked my socks off was Tim O'Brien's Going After Cacciato. It's a very surreal Vietnam War story. But, you know, I'm a huge fan of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and the list just goes on.
Yeah. So, you mentioned obviously you were at university with Flint. Flint would go on to work, and did you and Flint sort of end up working at Marvel and Sunbow at the same time, or?
Well, we never really worked for Marvel per se. It's before Sunbow opened a West Coast office, Marvel was handling all of everything about the production of G.I. Joe Transformers. But they weren't doing as many episodes as we ended up doing. So Marvel had their own Marvel employees who were these story editors. As soon as Sunbow hired Flint and hired myself and opened up the West Coast office, all that responsibility we took on. But Marvel still provided the storyboard artists, still provided the individual directors who were assigned to the episodes, and they still subcontract all the work to the animation studios.
Gotcha. So let's just take it back just before we start talking about Transformers a little bit more in depth here. You mentioned obviously getting into animation. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your intention is to become a director, you know, movies, things like that. You go into animation. What's your initial thoughts when you start putting your toe into the animation?
Maybe by that time I was disillusioned about becoming a director, but I still wanted to, you know, sell that great American screenplay.
Yeah.
You know, I aspired to be another John Milius or Robert Towne or Paul Schrader. And really, the animation thing was, we talked about it yesterday, Looney Tunes and probably Mighty Mouse were the things I remember that I enjoyed the most. But like any kid, that's how I spent my Saturday mornings, watching cartoons and, you know, whatever channels, 3 channels that we got. And again, not anything I ever thought of as a career, and certainly not a career for myself. So it really came down to Flint had this opportunity at Movie Studios to write for Mr. T, calls me up and says, how would you like to get paid for writing? And introduces me to the story editor of Dragon Slayer, and then ended up writing 4 to 13. Decided that this was better pay than my day rate working in film, and I didn't have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to be on vacation. And so I decided I'm going to pursue this. And then immediately had to do the Hollywood hustle to all the animation studios in town, trying to find some freelance assignments, and that probably lasted less than a year before Sunbow hired me.
Did you find it difficult, sort of, making the transition to writing animation?
A little bit, because the big difference between the two is when you're writing for live action, it can be detailed, but it's just a brief sort of overview of the scene. You never, ever, ever write in how the scene should be directed, like camera angles, and well, we used to write cut too. We don't even do that anymore. But in animation, you have to be very, very specific. So, if you imagine when you're watching the TV screen, everything that you see happen within that frame, you have to write. So if a character enters frame from off screen, you have to write that in. Or if something is coming, like the start screen is flying right towards the camera, you have to write that. Or flying away, you have to write that. And it really is beneficial to the storyboard artists because then they know what to draw. And of course, it snowballs from there. But you could never get away with doing anything like that in a live action script because basically you're telling the director what to do, and that does not fly.
So basically, writing animation is akin to directing it yourself. It's just that somebody else is going to get the credit on the end.
Exactly.
So you worked for Filmation for a little bit, then obviously, as you say, you ended with Sunbow. I've got to ask, because I know you worked on G.I. Joe a little bit, and you know, similar concept to Transformers in that it's a boys' military, you know, show, but this is giant robots from outer space. What was your initial take? Do you remember what you thought about Transformers when you first got
I didn't get it at all. I just knew that this was a new hot property, and I wanted to be a part of it. I had the same sort of reaction to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which, by the way, I could never say correctly. That was a big deal at the time, and I couldn't get a foot in the door with the studio that was doing that. But because I'd done a GoBots, which I still didn't really get, I thought, well, if they see I have GoBots on my resume, they'll think, oh, well, you can write for Transformers, which, of course, I had no idea what I was doing. But I thought, well, I can fake it, and so that's essentially what I did.
And in case anybody wasn't here yesterday when we did the watch-along, not only did you write for GoBots, but the first script plot summary that you turned in for Transformers was a GoBots episode.
It was, because the story editors had changed it so much after I turned in my final draft, in even the title. And I don't remember my original title. I don't remember what they changed it to. Yeah, I decided, well, I'm just going to pitch that story idea. And it came down to the fact that when you pitch stories to the story editor, typically they want a minimum of 3, sometimes it's 4 or 5. And what always happens to me is I'll be one short of the minimum that they want, and which is detailed. I know exactly the story I want to tell. I know how it begins, how it ends, what the scenes are going to be. In between, even though it's a one-page premise, I always end up submitting a story idea that's only half-baked, and that's the one they always take. So I really didn't think they'd be interested in the Gambler. I just wanted to fulfill my commitment to giving them the total number of premises that they wanted to see. So I was surprised that that's the one they picked.
Yeah. And you joined the show on with season 2, and at that point you were still freelance in terms of the writing. So what was the submission process? Was it the case that you would speak to the producers on the show and they would say, we want an episode about Smokescreen, or would it be as free as just give us a plot synopsis?
That's it.
Yeah.
The story editors would, it was a team, so 2 guys. I got the Writer's Bible, which had a basic overview of the concept of the show, a list of all the characters with a brief bio, and sometimes sample dialogue. And I think they gave me the miniseries to watch, and they gave me maybe a couple of sample scripts that had already been produced, and a list of the other shows or scripts that were in production, so that I wouldn't come up with an idea that they had already bought. And the rest was up to us. There was no dictate on which characters to use or what kind of stories to write.
Yeah. Okay. And did you find ideas coming quite freely in terms of ideas for episodes, things like that? Or, was it a case of just throwing as many ideas at the wall and seeing what would stick?
Yes, and but especially for the first one, it was difficult because in addition to not quite really having a handle on what Transformers was about, I didn't really come from a lover of science fiction background. So I think I struggled with it a little bit. But then I just decided not to think of it, as science fiction, even though it was the setting that it sort of takes place in. Yeah. And I sort of allowed myself to be influenced by, the few, because I never read science fiction novels growing up, but, I'd seen Star Wars, and I saw some of the classic, like Forbidden sure I was influenced by a lot of visual references I had in my head from the films that I've seen.
Yeah. And so you do several episodes during season 2. They come out, obviously famously, the Gambler introduces the character of Devcon to the world of the Transformers, and you know, other characters that will be making returns, some of which in the last couple of weeks in the Skybound comics in the form of Slazaro and no, Lord Gaigan hasn't showed up yet, spoilers. But you then have the transition to a producer's role come season 3, yes?
Yeah, because maybe Flint was the producer for season 2. I know he was a story editor, but it might have happened before season 3.
Okay.
Though I feel like that was, they just gave me that title straight from the get-go. But I was working on G.I. Joe at the same time, and I was pitching for Jim, and I was writing other scripts for other shows that they were doing. So to me, it's all kind of one big goulash of working for Sunday. Because at the same time, you know, they had me doing special projects. Like I wrote, you know, the PSAs for G.I. Joe, where they had me create an exclusive box set with new characters for Toys R Us, or they had a line of toys they wanted to, you know, have me write a Bible and develop for a TV show, and that wouldn't pan out. So, you know, it was kind of, it wasn't just me. We all were, you know, in addition to our assigned roles, we were also kind of monkeys for Hasbro to basically give them a lot of free work.
And one of the jobs that you had, which I imagine must have been fascinating, was you were behind the glass during a lot of the recording sessions for the voice actors.
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was the responsibility of being producer.
Yeah.
Which I didn't have the luxury, because I was a freelance writer, but I didn't have that luxury for my first episode, and we would have never had Lord Gaigan.
Did that take place in the recording sessions then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess Wally just decided that was how you pronounce the name.
Oh, sorry, the pronunciation.
Yeah, and nobody, you know, was there to correct it.
Yeah. So when you're backstage, I mean, you know, the recording sessions for a lot of the Sunbow cartoons are legendary in terms of the amount of work that Wally would put his actors through to get the take that he wanted. How was it being next to Wally when he was being demanding?
In the beginning, he was very intimidating. And I felt like I was viewed as an interloper. It's like, wow, I don't need this guy here. I don't need this kid here. You know, I was 30. Wally, I think, had at least 20 years old. But turns out, under that gruff exterior, Wally's a sweetheart. So at some point, we broke the ice, and I was more comfortable with him, he was more comfortable with me, so we could talk about how the scene should be played, or how the character should be delivering the line. And I mean, I would never tell him how to direct, but for the longest time, unless it was something really egregious happening with the line delivery, I kept my mouth shut, because he was captain of the ship. And he was very dedicated to preparing himself for working with the actors. And there was no way I was going to do it, and certainly no way he would allow me to do it, to direct him on how to direct the actors.
So would that have been, before the actors come in, you and Wally would sit down and go through the script, and that's where you would make changes?
No, Wally would do it by himself. I would show up the morning of, sit behind Wally, and the only time, well, whenever I had to rewrite something, it's just when the line wasn't working, and it wasn't conveying the right message that needed to be, or it was just a mouthful, and the actor kept stumbling, and so Wally would say, well, is there any way we can make this simple? And I would just come up with a way to rewrite the line to make it easier, and then move on.
I was going to say, so that was sort of the crux of it. If it was difficult for an actor to get the performance through, and I suppose that's a testament to Wally in the sense that he's able to identify that this bit of dialogue isn't going to work within the context of the voice that's saying and things like that, and then they would call upon you to come in and make changes.
Or it just could be for lack of a better way to put it, it's just a stupid line that there was a better one waiting to be written down that nobody saw, and we go, oh, we got a better idea for a line.
And so if you're there, you know, session after session after session, listening to these incredible actors deliver these lines, which have now become, I think we would all say, iconic performances, it must have been the case that when you were writing it, that character's voice was so raw in your head.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that helped. I don't think I was conscious of the time, but that helped me in future episodes that I wrote, because I could hear the character saying it in the actor's voice, and just sort of visualize being in the room with them as they're performing.
Now, the recording sessions, apart from Wally's perfectionism, that's one thing that always gets talked about. But the other thing is just the camaraderie amongst the whole team, especially the voice actors, in regards to them trying to make their own amusements. You know, Frank Belka famously making noises to make it sound like the machines had broken and things like that, so Wally would freak out. Whose team were you on? Were you on Team Voice Actor or Team Wally at that point?
Team Voice Actor.
Yeah.
Is there any moment that you remember that stands out? Or?
God, there was so many. And they happened so quickly, so I only have a general sense. First of all, they're entertaining as hell, as you well know. And you get a room full of them together, and they're always, it's like a friendly competition to make each other laugh. And it's, you know, it's just, when you get a dozen, I don't know if we had 20 of them, it's not that big of a room. But even before going into the recording booth, or waiting for Wally to show up, or Wally to just be ready for it, there was a small green room where they're all hanging out and talking about an audition they had yesterday. We're talking about, you know, an anecdote of something that happened on set 20 years ago. Because, you know, a lot of these actors were also on-screen actors.
Yeah.
And Greg mentioned it the other day, sitting across from Catman Struthers, as he, and I thought it was guitar, but Greg said it was ukulele. But either way, just sitting across from him, you know, our knees were touching, and he's just playing guitar and singing songs, and it's like, I would always think, I never would imagine as a kid that these people that I used to see only on my television set, I'm sitting not just in the same room, but right next to them. And played a character on G.I. Joe. And I first became consciously of Hank Garrett in a movie called 3 Days of the Condor. Has anybody seen that? He was the mailman that killed all the people in the building, and he was terrified. And there was a big fight in Faye Dunaway's apartment with him. So when I come up the stairs and go to the green room, and he's sitting there, I was like, oh my God, that's the killer mailman. And then I'm listening to him tell stories, and I realized, well, he's not anything like that character. And it turns out his career started in wrestling, and he was known as the Minnesota Farm Boy. And it was just delightful to listen to his stories.
It's so good, like, as you say, being a student of film and television and things like that, that you'd see somebody and just be like, oh, I'm a little starstruck here, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. People have talked about, you know, Scatman's famous ukulele sessions and stuff like that. It must have been such a wonderful experience. So you work on Transformers. My question to you is, talking about celebrities, were you behind the scenes for any of the Transformers the movie recording sessions?
No. On one hand, because I did all the episodes of the TV series, I was a little disappointed that they didn't want me involved in that. But then I realized, because of the star-studded cast, and in particular Orson Welles, they all wanted to be there for that. And at the same time, I knew the history that Orson Welles had with directors later in his life. And I had heard the tapes. And I knew that I did not want to be the person Orson Welles that he was going to be playing Planet, because he looked like a planet himself.
I remember having a conversation with Greg several years ago, and we were talking about the recording for Transformers the movie, and he said that when they were in Wally Burr's studio, they were all staring out of a window on the second floor, looking out as the limousine pulled up, and out of the limousine came Orson Welles' wheelchair. And then 20 minutes later, in a separate limousine, Orson Welles showed up. You know, I just sat there thinking to myself, that's Hollywood. That is star power right there. Yeah. It's probably for the best that you ducked out that day. So you work on Transformers, and then you know there was one other thing that you were talking to me about at breakfast, which I couldn't believe, I didn't realize at the time. After Transformers, you worked at Mirage Comics.
Yes.
Yeah. Does anybody know what Mirage Comics is? Yeah. It was a little comic book called, what's it called? You said it was difficult to pronounce.
Yeah.
Teenage Mutants. Yeah. So it was Eastman and Laird,
Yes.
who famously created the Turtles.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Somehow or another, I met an animator in New York City whose father was famous for working, I think, MGM Animation doing Tom and Jerry cartoons. And so, I never met his father, I think he had already passed away. But Mark had a little studio in New York City and was doing animation for, I think, commercials. And we were trying to work on a project together. I can't remember if it was an animated series or a feature, but it was something he had hired me to consult with him on. And not long after, Mark Zander, that was his name. And not long after, I get a call from Peter and Kevin's entertainment attorney saying that Mark Zander had recommended me because Peter and Kevin were looking for an animation consultant. The deal they had with Fred Wolf Films is that they could review every script that came out of the studio and give notes. And then Peter and Kevin were, at the time, were very sensitive about a number of things, but the only one I can now recall was they didn't want to see a female turtle, which I guess Fred was very interested in doing.
Yeah.
Because part of Fred's deal was he got 20% of the licensing revenue, because all the licensing was based on the characters and designs that Fred Wolf Studios did, not what Peter and Kevin did.
It's lucky for him then that turtles never became a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that 20% didn't amount to much, did it?
So I said, yeah, sure. And I was working at DC Comics at the time. And I thought, well, I can do both. And all I had to do was take one day off a month, drive up from New York City to Western Massachusetts, meet with Peter and Kevin, and talk about various things. Because they asked me to do other things besides that. But essentially, I had 10 days to review a script, write my notes, send them to Peter and Kevin, who basically rubber stamp them. They would send them to Fred Wolf. Because if they waited after 10 days, and Fred wasn't obligated to do anything with the notes. And I'm not even sure with the notes he was really obligated to do anything. It was just more of a courtesy. But they also hired me to write a new Bible for a whole new Transformers, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series, because obviously the show that Fred Wolf created did not mirror the comic books that Peter and Kevin were doing. And the three of us were big fans of Batman animated series. And I convinced them, I said, let's do a show like that that's closer to your comic books. So they hired me to write a new Bible. And on top of that, they were going to fund an animated Christmas special. So I wrote a script based on one of their comic book stories that was a Christmas story. That ultimately didn't get made. And nor could we convince Judy Price of CBS to spend $500,000 per episode, which is what Warner Brothers was spending on Batman, when she was only paying Fred Wolf $250, and it was the #1 show. So if she would spend another $250,000 per episode, she'd still only be the #1 show. And I couldn't argue with that logic.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've asked an awful lot of questions. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for Michael? Because otherwise, yes, I've got hands on again. I'm going to come running this. I need to stretch these old legs.
Hi there, Michael. You talked about how you had carte blanche to come up with episodes that you wanted. But if I remember rightly, your name appears on The Return of Optimus Prime, Part 2.
Yes.
So that one, famously, everyone, I know Flint will argue who killed Optimus or not, but you basically managed to bring him back within 5 seconds.
I got lucky.
So with that, did this come down on high from Hasbro that we've got to get him back, and was this the thing? How am I going to do this? And then also, there's some great lines in that episode where we get a feeling that Optimus is a bit more than the average bot. There's some great lines about we're all a little wiser now. He knows who Galvatron is. Despite the fact he's been dead, he knows who he is really. So I'm just wondering, what was that episode like to write? Bring him back. Was it really important, or was it just you made a mess of here, Hasbro, I want to tell you what you meant? And just a second part that I ever made, like I said, for so many of us, Optimus was our space dad, all these inspirational words that Peter Cullen put out there. Obviously, you're putting the words in his mouth. So for you, was there someone in your life who was your inspiration when you needed a noble quotation to go to?
I game plan to end with the return of Optimus Prime. It was only after the movie, and Hasbro was, the way we heard, they were getting, thousands of phone calls from distraught mothers whose little boys had locked themselves in the bathroom and weren't coming out until Optimus Prime was alive again, and then the mothers demanding that Hasbro fix it, and in turn, and then Hasbro demanded that we fix it. Even though they were fine with killing off Optimus Prime because it was an opportunity to introduce a whole new line of toys, which what the show was all about in the first place, is selling toys. So it was kind of a pivot at the end. Now, a couple of things at play. In addition to my contract as a producer, I had a separate contract that guaranteed me a minimum number of writing assignments per year. And it was designed to be pay or play. And so, because I was just too damn busy to write the minimum number of scripts I was guaranteed, they'd have to pay me for not writing, which every writer loves. So at the last minute, when they realized we were getting close to the end, and they owed me, I don't know, maybe 3 scripts. Carol Weitzman, who was a VP in the New York office, showed up one day and said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to write a gem episode." And I said, "I'm the boys' toy guy. I can't write that." And well, it doesn't matter because we're not going to pay you to not write. So I came up with a story. I'm going to come back around to Optimus Prime. So I came up with a story that I thought Hasbro would absolutely hate, and it turned out they loved it. And then I find out that it's every Gem fan's favorite episode because it makes every Gem fan cry. So, the same thing happened with the return of Optimus Prime. Marv, I think maybe by this time Marv was story editor for the last few episodes. So Marv came up with this story, but he and his writing partner only wrote the first part, and it was decided that I would write the second part. So Marv had done more work on the first part in terms of the outline, the detail. And what I got from Marv for the second part was, well, read the script for the first part, and here's like a 5-page outline of just kind of the beats of each scene, and the rest was up to me to sort of make up. Like, I mean, he didn't give me any certain lines he wanted to see, or any staging of any particular scene. It was just these generic beats that would finish off the story. So I had to come up with all the shading and the coloring and dialogue and just everything else to tell the story. Now, did that answer your question, or did I leave something out? Okay.
We've just got one over. Michael? I'm over here. No, right in front of you. Oh, yeah. Still one.
Just wanted to say, it's been really interesting watching both this panel today and the one you did yesterday. Just wondering, if you were given the chance, would you like to write another Transformers series?
Would I write for Transformers again?
Yeah.
Oh, in a heartbeat. When I first moved back to LA in 2009, the first people I went to see was Hasbro, thinking that would be an easy way in, and that from my point of view, the kids who were running the show would have had to have grown up on what we did and would be appreciative of what I would be able to offer And I was also a little disappointed that when the first live-action film came out, that nobody had bothered to contact any of us who worked on Transformers and for Sunbow, if only to be in the writer's room and help them develop something. But I got over it.
Right, over here again. Hello, Michael? No? There we go, right. I'm here.
Hi Michael, we spoke briefly outside for the comparison between Scottish weather and Vermont weather, you may recall. My question is more about the fact that you quickly skipped from saying you were in Vermont and then you were in Los Angeles. How did you convince yourself and your family you were leaving Vermont to go to Los Angeles? It's not exactly a 5-minute drive.
You talking about the transition from Vermont to LA? Well, it started with when I got out of high school in Vermont. My father was worked for an insurance company and was being transferred to Southern California. And I just saw that as an opportunity to go with him because for about 6 months, 10 years earlier, we had lived in Southern California, and I remember really liking it. So I just felt like growing up in a small town, it would be a great opportunity. Plus, at the time, the college system, the state college system in California was very inexpensive. So saw that as another opportunity to take advantage of in California. But then I find myself going back to Vermont and then coming back to LA. Did I get all of your questions? Okay.
I think we've got time for just one more. I think, yeah, we've got one just at the back there. I can't see because of the stage lights.
Hello? Okay. Mr. Charles, this is not going to be a serious question, but I must know, what is your favorite dinosaur?
What's your favorite dinosaur?
I don't have a favorite dinosaur. I was one of those kids who was never into dinosaurs.
As a kid then, what were you into? Apart from movies, which we've already talked about.
Muscle cars.
So what's your favorite muscle car?
Oh man, when I was a kid, Ford GT40, but that's more of a supercar. A street car, I was really impressed with the 57 Chevy Bel Airs when I was like 5 or 6 years old.
So that's an interesting one to springboard off then, before we wrap this up. So you're a fan of cars?
Yes.
You write a show where a bunch of the cats, yeah, you see where I'm going with this. A bunch of the cats turn into cars. So, did you use smokescreen in the Gambler just because it was a cool looking car?
I did. And at the time, I owned a Porsche, but jazz didn't work for me in that episode for some reason, and that's the only reason I can think of. Plus, I think with smokescreen based on a Datsun 240Z.
I don't know anything about cars, but people are nodding, yeah.
It was, okay. So, I was a big fan of what was then called IMSA Racing. And Paul Newman was getting into race car driving, and he raced a Datsun 240Z in the same colors as smokescreen.
Wow. So there's a little bit of trivia for the wiki. Well, that's brilliant. Michael, thank you so much for this. It's flown over. We will be back tomorrow morning. If you are interested in the Return of Optimus Prime Part 2, we're going to be sitting and watching it and talking over it tomorrow to dive in a little bit more. Thank you all. Give Michael a big round of applause.